Welcome to Beyond Better, a podcast that explores a simple but profound idea. We all deserve to live lives we love, and that includes our work lives too. I'm Stacy, Ennis, an author and longtime location-independent entrepreneur living in Portugal with my family of 4. Join me as I talk business, location independence, writing, travel, and so much more. All focused on building a life that is beyond better. Welcome. I am so excited to be back with you this week. We're going to be talking all about self-employment, a little bit about building a remote or location independent business. I'm so excited for that conversation. Before I introduce you to this week's guest, I want to read a podcast review. So this one comes from Sarah W. Sarah says, "This podcast is always a fun listen. I love that it inspires me to continue to pursue a passion-filled life." She says, inspirational. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate you taking the time to leave that review. And if you are an avid or even new listener of the pod and it's delivered any value for you, I would so appreciate you taking the time to leave hopefully a 5-star review. For me, it just helps me reach more listeners with the message of Beyond Better. Now, this week, I am joined by Jeffrey Shaw. Jeffrey is often described as an authority and advocate for self-employed business owners, valued for his actionable and in-the-trenches approach to achieving business and life success. Selling eggs door-to-door at 14 years old led to a lifetime of self-employment. In his 20s, he built a portrait photography business and became one of the most sought-after portrait photographers for affluent families in the United States for more than 3 decades. Today, Jeffrey is the author of Lingo and The Self-Employed Life, host of the Self-Employed Life podcast with nearly 2 million downloads, and founder of the Self-Employed Business Institute. Welcome, Jeffrey. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Likewise, Stacy. I'm glad to be here with you.
So you, in your bio, you talk about how you started selling eggs door to door at 14, which I love that so much. At what point in your journey did something click for you where you thought, okay, this is it for me. I'm always going to be my own boss. And then how did that lead you into now helping others do the same through the work that you do?
Yeah. So it was the impetus for selling eggs, right? It was the impetus for deciding to come up with this crazy idea. I lived in the country a couple hours north of New York City. And at that time, it was very remote and there were a lot of farms around. And so I went and struck a deal with a farmer where he would provide the eggs and I paid him 25 cents a dozen. And I sold them for $1.25 a dozen. But the impetus for that was actually a single conversation with my father. You know, you could say a single conversation, but in my own mind, probably things were already trickling in the back of my head. But I had this conversation with my father, and he was a man of very few words. And I had a bit of a challenging relationship with him. So we didn't speak much. But what he said at one point was, no one is going to care about your life as much as you do. And at the time, it felt very negative to me. I actually have grown into realizing it's actually pretty good advice. But at the time, I really felt like he was saying, and that includes me, you know, I felt like it included him. Like, I'm just not going to care about your life as much as you do. But it instilled in me kind of like this, okay then, it's just sort of like, what do I do with that information? And that's when I just saw, it's like, all right, I gotta do this myself. Like it just shut down the prospect there was any other path for me. Like I didn't imagine that there would be a job that would hire me. I didn't imagine there was any opportunity for higher education. I grew up, my family did not have much money at all. And I grew up in a community that was just hardworking, but nobody talked about higher education, not even my guidance counselor. So that conversation just lit a fire in me to say, okay, then this is up to me. No one's going to care about my life as much as I do. So let's create your own life. And that literally was the impetus for selling eggs door to door. I did that for a couple of years, actually sold the business to a local kid.
Wait, hold on.
I know.
How old were you when you
Probably
sold
about
your business?
Probably about 16 to 17. I remember, at 17,
Oh
I
my
kind of wanted
gosh.
to get interested in other things. I know. And I don't remember
Oh
for the
my
life of me, I can't remember how much I sold it for, but I wish I did.
oh,
Um,
amazing.
and then, finished high school, took a year off after high school because I didn't know what to do with myself. But the one talent I had, which was highly recognized in high school, was photography. But it was all fine art photography. But I went off to photography school for a 1 year program, not having still any idea what I was going to do with that talent. I didn't know if it was a viable business. But in the course of that year, I discovered how much I loved the intimacy of a portrait session, and I loved photographing on location. I had no interest in photographing in a studio. So at age 20, I launched this photography business, which floundered for a few years. I figured out who I was meant to serve and what to do about that. That's a long story in itself. And by 23, 24 years old, I was serving the most affluent families in the United States as a family portrait photographer, photographing at their gorgeous multiple homes in the US and in Europe. And um, did that straight out for, it's now been 40 years I've been doing that. But today I do 3 sessions a year. Like I do very little. And this probably would be my last year I do any photo shoots because over the last 15 years, I've been doing less photography and more of what I do today as far as coaching and content creation and launching the Business Institute. Because 15 or 16 years ago, after 25 years of being self-employed, I wanted to do more than serve my own business. I wanted to help other people have an easier way to figuring all this out than what I had to go through. And it pains me to see people reinventing the wheel. It's like, I've already figured a lot of this out. Let me help you. So that's led me to what I do today, and this feeling of advocacy, as you said.
Hmm. I love that you kind of had this experience with your eggs, and then that kind of set this mindset forward. And for me, I remember when I was a kid, I had a friend who had she sold like tuna from fishermen to our local co-op. And I came to help her with like demoing the food. I was probably maybe like 13 or 14. And I remember she gave me a check for $20 at the end of this. And I remember thinking, that's a lot of money because I'm, 13, 14. And then the other piece of it was, how much is she making in her business? And
Interesting.
I want to be the one that's writing the checks, right? Like I had that
That's cool.
experience of,
Yep.
I don't want to be on the other side of this. And I think, and of course, I'd had all these little entrepreneurial things throughout my youth, as most of us do. But I think having those moments where it anchors in you and like you really kind of see the path.
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting is, and I think this will be a cool thing for us to dig into, because you say you're an advocate for self-employed individuals, right? And as we both know, the failure rate is huge for people starting businesses. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I think there's the knowledge and skills gap. I think cash flow is a big piece, right? That people run into cash flow issues.
Hmm.
But I think honestly, a lot of it is just kind of like, not that mindset does everything, but just going into it, not having that resilience and tenacity and the vision to see it through. And I can almost predict sometimes when I meet somebody that starts a business, I can see how likely they are to be successful, right? So
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from you, because this is what you do. When somebody comes into your world, how do you advocate for them? Like, what does that mean exactly? And how do you help them be successful in this
Yeah.
endeavor and not be one of the statistics that fail?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of separate the two a little bit, because the advocacy is more to me than the individual. It's for the whole idea of being self-employed. Like I
Got it. Okay.
really, and in my book, like chapter 1 breaks up all the terminology of solopreneur, small business, entrepreneur, self-employed, like why we need to like take ownership of the term self-employed, because I really think as a community it needs to be much more highly respected, and it has to some degree, but here's just an interesting piece of trivia. At the beginning of the pandemic, and I know you're in Portugal, but here in the US in the early days of the pandemic, it was announced that the US government would be offering some financial aid to businesses. Now, in the past, that has been designated for small businesses, but most self-employed people don't fall into the definition of small business as the government designates it. And in fact, there have been times in the past during the recession when the only financial aid was available for businesses of minimally 20 employees. Well, you and I are talking to people that are businesses of one, maybe a small team, maybe a virtual team. So, right, suddenly that doesn't include them. Do you know that? So what was introduced in the US was the PPP loans. Do you know that was the first? So we're talking 2020. That was the first time in US history that the words self-employment appeared in a piece of US legislation. Okay.
Really?
And I had heard that, and I researched it, and I asked the CEO of the National Association for Self-Employed People, which is connected to the US government, and he validated it that yes, that was the first time. So to me, that was where my advocacy spirit kicked in. So I was like, okay, the door has been cracked open because the US government recognizes self-employed people matter, that we are a huge part of the economics of this country. They've cracked open the door, and I jam my foot in it. I'm not letting you close it. So I went out on an all out, I was already writing my book, but I went on an all out, straight out sense of advocacy. I even created an organization called the Voices of the Self-Employed, which is just a collection of names. So should there ever be a point when we need to speak up on our behalf, I can quickly call upon people to sign a petition. So to me, while I've created an educational platform through the Self-Employed Business Institute, and I'm a coach, and I've created many parts of my business model in support of self-employed people, it really is more in my heart. Every day I feel like I'm waking up as an advocate. I'm fighting on behalf of a community of people that deserve attention, respect, support. I just don't think there's a more dignified, respectful way of living than to actually be bold enough to start your own business. Not to disrespect people with a corporate job, but I'm sorry. Yes. This takes chutzpah,
Yes.
I just don't think anybody deserves more respect.
Earlier, right? You have to have that resilience. And I think belief in yourself that you can problem solve and find your way through. Before we move on to the other part of that question, Jeffrey, could you just quickly clarify what it means to be self-employed compared to entrepreneur? And then I'd love to get around to that other piece of the question, which is how do you survive it? And how does the work you do help people do that?
So self-employment, small business is a useless term when you're self-employed, right? Because the definition is so incredibly broad. You're talking about small businesses that make millions of dollars and have hundreds of employees. All right. So it's useless. We don't want to be thrown into a big bucket that ends up not serving us. Entrepreneur is, how can you ignore? It's a great word, has a great energy. I just am a little cautious of the fact that when people think of entrepreneurship, they often think about building to sell. And they also think a little bit more of hustle culture than I want them to when they think entrepreneurship. So I like the energy of it, but I caution people from it a little bit because it now, where self-employed used to feel this way, I think entrepreneur sometimes can feel like, oh, you're in between jobs. So it's got a little bit of a mixed feeling to it. Solopreneur is one of the most commonly used terms, one of the most searched terms. But here's what I cringe a little bit every time. And I know you use solopreneur, and I don't mean any disrespect in using it, but I cringe a little bit every time because none of us are going to get to where we want to go solo. And I want to get self-employed business owners out of the mindset of going this alone. So I shy away from solopreneur. I'm like, just energetically, I don't want you to be saying to your brain that you're in this solo, because you're not. You're part of a community. There's people that can help you and support you. So I come back to landing on self-employment. To me, is the best term that you can use. It lets people know that you're bold. It lets people know that you're in control of your own destiny. And it actually also just describes your business model. There's taxation structure to being self-employed. So to me, I feel like to a degree I've been successful getting people to really use the term self-employment self-employment much more often.
That's a helpful designation, Jeffrey. I appreciate you breaking that all down.
Excellent. So as far as the failure piece, and it's so important that you're mentioning this, because the reason I think a lot of people fail, when I hesitate to use the word, because by failing doesn't mean that the rug's been swept out underneath them. It's also why people give up. And it's because they run out of steam and they run out of money. And so I look at the Self-Employed Business Institute as a little bit of an intervention. So when we're prospecting for students in the Business Institute, we are specifically prospecting for people that have been in business for 2 to 5 years. We will even go down as far as 1 year, but 2 to 5 years is sort of the sweet spot. Why is that? Because I want people to have been out there for at least a little bit. Completely new startups, everybody's so pumped up on adrenaline, they don't know the challenges yet. But once you've been out there for a year or two, that's when you feel like you've worked really hard, but it hasn't quite come together yet. It's when you realize that people aren't quite getting what the point you're trying to make. It's when you realize that this is all more challenging than you thought. It's when you realize that, oh my gosh, I left my corporate job and, to do something I'm passionate about. And now I'm 2 years in and I'm not making what I made. I put you may have regrets. And I just find between 2 to 5 years, because we're humans, after 5 years of not getting the results that are satisfactory to you, you're going to give up. You're going to run out of steam. You're likely to run into cash problems if you haven't already. So I literally look at what we do in the Self-Employed Business Institute almost as an intervention. How can we get to people that have been in business 2 to 5 years and give them the business structure, what we refer to as the self-employed ecosystem? How can we give them the business structure they need so that they can spend more time doing what they're good at? Because that's one of the biggest surprises when people become self-employed. They're so passionate about what they're good at. And next thing they know, 90% of their time is spent getting the business, marketing the business, running the business, that they don't actually get to focus enough on what they're really good at. And with better structure and better systems, you can achieve that goal.
It's such an important piece, and I'm glad you brought up marketing because that's one of the things I definitely wanted to dig into with you today. This past week, I participated in a conference, and I I was there as a pro, so people could book with me either as a book coach or to get business advice. So I had kind of a wide range of people for different needs. And I got a lot of people asking me questions about generating leads and getting new clients and then the authors also talking about like building their platform um, over and over again in the conversations that I have with people, the prevailing question is, how do I find my ideal clients or customers? And I know that you have some systems around that you teach. I'm wondering if you can share some strategies or tactics with our audience.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when I first started really honing in on the content for self-employed people, I was surprised at how many people, podcast hosts and otherwise, would describe me as being disruptive. But I thought was really funny because I'm like, I have never in my life been cool enough to be disruptive. Like, it's just not, I've never considered I was the good kid in the back of the classroom. But I realized it's not, for me, it's not disruptive, it's unconventional. And this is the core lesson I have learned. If I could pass anything on to people from someone who's been self-employed for 40 years, my entire life, is that I don't care what business you're in, by being self-employed, you are inherently an unconventional business. You have chosen an unconventional path by this world's standards. And most of what goes on around you is the complete opposite of the way you need to behave. So for example, most business, traditional business, is transactional based. When you're self-employed, no matter what your industry is, even if it's products, you are relationship based, because when you're self-employed, you need the repeat business. You need the referrals at a scale that other people don't. So honing in on your ideal client is essential. Talk about a traditional business advice. So we all know the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, right? It's so bogus, it's ridiculous for self-employed people, because what the 80-20 rule says is that 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers. What that really means is that you're wasting your time on 8 out of 10 people. And self-employed business owners can't afford that time. We don't work at a volume that's so great that we can afford to waste our time on 8 out of 10 people. We need every client or almost every client to pay off in all the ways that we need. So to me, when you're a self-employed business or a solo business, you need every client to be ideal. So how do you achieve that? It's like literally the subject of my first book, Lingo. It is to learn to speak the lingo, the secret language of the people you want to serve. You want to send up smoke signals and what I call emotional triggers that are so clear to your ideal clients, your ideal customers, that it's like a secret handshake. Like they see that you get them. They know that you get them. You can send up cues, but in order to do that, you have to really take the time to understand them. I mean, I went from a lower middle class kid to serving the most affluent families in the US as a photographer. How I did that? I took the time to study what triggered them. I went to high end stores in New York City and restaurants, and I paid attention. I observed what I observed. Like, for example, one of the first things I observed was designer names, right? Walmart, which is where I grew up, going to Kmart and Walmart, they don't have designer names, right? But you go into these high-end stores and everything was in somebody's name. I was like, oh, it's prestigious for your business to be in your name. You're selling yourself. You're selling your personal brand. My photography business had a generic photography name to it. I switched it to my name. So now Jeffrey Shaw, thankfully a very marketable name, became the name of my business, right? So pricing psychology, how things are marketed, presented. And then when I got into those homes, I started seeing all the cues. They just live differently. They decorate their house differently than what I understood. They think differently. Once you really take the time, no matter what market it is that you want to serve, whether it's teenagers, right? Teenagers have a lingo. Let's face it, right? They're like, so whoever you want to serve, you have to take the time to deeply understand what makes them tick, what gets their attention, what triggers them emotionally that they want to respond, and then replicate that. You have to speak their secret language, and you'll know you'll have it when you're attracting your ideal clients and other people have no idea what you're talking about. That's when you'll know you've actually honed in on the secret language of the lingo of your ideal clients, because people who aren't your ideal clients won't even know what you're talking about or will see very little meaning. I'll give you a quick example because I want to bring this down to the ground for your folks. I was working with someone a while back, helping them come up with a kind of a tagline to put on the back of his business card. But he served two very diverse audiences, which again, a lot of people do. And I help them figure out what's in common between the diverse audience so they don't have to pick a niche, right? So they don't have to pick one narrow thing. And in this case, he wanted to work with artists because that was his background and who he loved. And he also wanted to work with very high, C-suite executives in pretty conservative companies, and particularly gay executives, something he wanted to work on. And as diverse as those two audiences seem, they're both audiences that are living life outside of a box. And in the gay corporate executive box, in many cases, they're literally in a box. They're in the closet, because it may not be a safe environment or it may harm their career. So the tagline we came up with the business card is, do you live your life coloring outside the lines? All right. If you are straight, conservative business guy, you're not going to get that. Like, yeah, no, I'm wearing a blue blazer and a blue shirt. Like, no, I don't live my life coloring outside the lines. But an in the closet gay executive knows exactly what that means. An artist feels that every day of their life. That's what I mean. Like that one sentence calls forward people that get that. The people that don't get it are like, yeah, okay, you're just weird. I don't know what you're talking about. Great. And that's how you end up with a business that's attracting your ideal customers and filtering out those that aren't.
Yeah, thank you for that example. I think to build on that, I know one of the things that I talk a lot with people about is attracting and repelling people to your brand. And I think when you're new or even early on in your self-employed journey, you're like, no, I don't want to repel anyone. I want everybody to come. I want everybody to reach out to me, everybody to follow me, But then you find out that you can build a really disengaged or like the wrong audience, the wrong customer base, and numbers and doesn't actually necessarily convert to revenue. So it's better to have a much smaller lead base of quality potential clients and customers and less but really engaged followers or email list subscribers. But that feels very counterintuitive and scary, I think, to a lot of self-employed people.
It does, but I will tell you that it's all downhill from there. Like once some money is enough, once any amount of money is good enough, you'll have a hard time getting yourself out of that mindset So you're better off going into it. And to your point, and I mentioned earlier about like the choice that so many people are, I told you my thoughts are unconventional, because conventional business tells us to pick a niche, pick one thing to do to one audience. And what I teach is the niches within you. What's your area of expertise for which there are multiple audiences that can benefit from that area of expertise? And you have multiple ways which you can communicate it, but you have to do the work to be able to clearly communicate what you're good at, right? That is probably beneficial to multiple audiences, people walking different various forms of life or paths in life, but you have to become recognizable and known for an area of expertise. So that's how I've reframed niche, is like the niche is actually within you, and it's your known area of expertise for which there are likely many people from multiple walks of life that can benefit from your area of expertise. But you're staying narrow because you're staying with what you're good at. But it broadens because there are multiple audiences that can benefit from that. And that's just a better business model than this super narrow, let me do one thing for one audience in one way.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jeffrey. And just to clarify, I think this will be helpful for listeners. I think you're referring to service-based, self-employed. Yes? Because there's some difference if we're looking at, and tell me if I'm wrong, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but if you're selling like soap, let's say, and you know who your customer is, but it's more of a business, right? Like it's not that
more product-based,
service-based here. So obviously it's a business, but more of a product-based business. Talk to me a little bit about that, because we haven't really dug into that. And do you see that the same, or do you have a different perspective? I'd be curious to know.
I think it's more similar than people think. So to me, I look at, and I agree with you, I do focus on service-based entrepreneurs in service-based businesses. However, I try to look at every business as being service-based. And I don't mean just customer service. I mean how you structure your business. So for example, I was a portrait photographer. I gave a tangible product. The tangible product I delivered was a photograph. So you could say that's what people were buying. And in fact, this is what separated me from all the other photographers I knew of, because they were all selling photographs. I wasn't even, and I won't even say that I was selling the experience, right? Because that became the new fashionable thing to say at some point. It's like, oh, it's all about experience. I'm like, I wasn't even selling the experience. What I was selling was the connection that not just what I had to the family, but the families had to themselves. The families had, I always said my goal was to stop a mom and dad from walking down the hallway and stop them in their tracks to look at the photograph of their family. All right. So it wasn't the experience of the portrait session that I was selling. I was really good at the session. Kids had a great time, but even that wasn't what I was selling. What I was selling was the experience of stopping in the hall. It was never about the tangible product. It was everything to me was about in the service of that. So, hey, if you're a soap maker, and I'll tell you, I love that you're brought that up as an example, because here where I lived in Florida, we have a arts and crafts market every Saturday. And there's one particular soap maker I like, and I buy all my soap from her. Why? Because her expertise is the scent. She has a way of capturing the fragrance and the scent in soap that I have never come across any other soap maker, right? And I've told her that, and she does have a unique process. And she just says, she goes, to me, she and I are aligned in that way. Like scent creates a mood. And when I shower in the morning, I literally want to smell the soap. I don't want a passive soap. I want an aggressive soap. I want an aggressively fragrant soap. So she has a process so she does single herself out from the 5 other soap makers that are there because of how heavy dosed she is on the fragrance. Right. So I would challenge anybody. In fact, I think what separates a product-based business, what you might think of as not being service-based, I would challenge you to turn that on upside down and focus on what is the service of the product that you provide. You probably have heard the phrase, it's pretty common in business to sell the benefits, not the feature. Okay. The automobile industry is always a good example of that, because most automobile manufacturers sell the features, like the airbags, the cup holders, which most people just have tuned out like white noise. And then you have those companies like Subaru is an auto manufacturer that stands out to me, that does an incredible job at selling the lifestyle, the dogs, the number of dogs you can fit in the back of the the Subaru, the hiking of it. That's the
I
difference,
love
right?
Subaru. I think they're
Exactly.
such a great brand. Yes, I
Yeah, and
agree.
I have a Mini Cooper, and for the same reason, it's like you can sell. I can't even find half the features on the Mini Cooper, but I feel there's a spirit. Their whole slogan was "Keep Motoring," right? It's just like it's a club, but like, and I cruising down the roads in Florida with my top down because it's a convertible, and it's a vibe, right? So I don't. I actually think if you're in a product business, think about what you're really in service of to your buyer and speak to that.
I love that so much. I'm really glad I asked that question because I think we got just like a little bit deeper from where we were before. And it got me thinking too. Last week I was in Zurich, Switzerland, and I went to this little handmade market. And I went to one of the tables of a woman that was selling these handmade products. She had some purses and some, keychains and just different things that she'd made. And I ended up following her on Instagram and just chatting with her. And she was the only one that I ended up following and chatting with. And I think a lot of it was because she exuded like joy in this business. She really, I could just see her face light up when she talked about her work and the craftsmanship that goes into her products. And to your point, there is you still are a human behind the product that people are buying, and especially as the world kind of matures and goes on in years, I feel like that's what we're craving in every business is a
100%.
human touch. I mean, so much has gotten disconnected from that I think we're looking for humanity in those businesses, which has a lot to do with the messaging, to your point,
Yeah.
and being able to connect with people.
100%. And yeah, I mean, brands have a personality too. And, even if it's a company brand, but, you and I both serve people that tend to be their own brand. But even if it's a company brand, brands can have a personality.
So, one of the things that I found really interesting in the work that you do is that you talk about two things. One is hug marketing, and one is the emotional journey. And I'm wondering if you can dig into those a little bit for our viewers and listeners. Hopefully, they can pull something out of that they could apply to their own businesses.
Yeah, 100%. And again, as I said earlier, unconventional, that word will keep coming up because, first of all, as a guy who wrote a book called Lingo, I'm very focused on the energy of words. And I think we need to be. And it's very important in marketing because,
Yes,
right?
I love
Because there's an
that.
energy behind words and people are feeling that energy. And there's so many marketing words I can't stand. Like, I hate the fact that in traditional business, we refer to people as a target market. Like, that's what could be creepier. I just think it's a horrible terminology, and what do? You jam people through a funnel and a pipeline and you send them over tripwires. Like, it's just full of really negative words that and here's what's really key. You just can't lie to yourself. You can't lie to your energy. And if you even behind the scenes, whether it's with your team and in your own mind, are thinking about your audience as a target market, they are going to feel targeted. And if they feel targeted, they're going to back way up. So I was just really focused on how do I change the energy by which we put ourselves out there, let the world know what we do. You can call it marketing, but I just like to look at it like, how do we let the world know who we are and what we do in a way that feels clean for us? Because one of the biggest challenges I have found with service-based entrepreneurs is that they're so focused on the service to others, they actually don't serve their businesses enough by getting the word out there about what they do. So it's the irony to being service-based. So that's how I came up with the term hug marketing. Hug marketing was me turning the terminology of marketing upside down and getting it out of the funnel mentality and this idea that if you just think about the shape of a funnel, this idea that I'm going to appear open-minded and loving at the top to do what? Narrow down and send people through a small hole at the bottom. So I wanted to shift the energy. So I changed it to this idea of hug marketing, which is a series of concentric circle, like nesting circles. And it has a very specific strategy. It's not just a concept. In the Business Institute, we spent 2 months teaching the step-by-step process of walking people from the outermost circles, one circle at a time until they get to the center, which is the hug. And the hug represents, particularly in today's world where a lot of us do work online, imagine having a relationship and whether, it's a one-to-one relationship, or even if you're product based, if your customers have an affinity for your brand, like think about it. We all have an affinity for Apple. If Steve Jobs was still alive, if you had a chance to, would you not want to hug him? Right? It's just because you can have an affinity for a brand, let alone you and I. You and I serve, there's probably a lot of clients you and I serve that we don't meet in person for a long time or if ever. But I tell you what, and this happens to me all the time, if I run into a podcast listener, I'm going to hug that podcast listener because there's a connection. Like, I'm so grateful they listen to the show. I'm so grateful that I can see their appreciation and gratitude. So to me, it changes the energy of marketing when your goal is to get a hug than it is to target people or to send them into a funnel. So the hug marketing system is a step-by-step, and I'll focus in on the outermost ring because it's really the most critical, is what I refer to as lurkers. And it's not only critical to your business, but it's also the one people overlook, or it's kind of a weird term. So lurkers are the outermost ring of your marketing, and it is gaining the eyes and ears of people that you don't know them by name, or you don't really know they're there. You do this every day on your podcast, right? You have lurkers. You have people that are listening to your show. You might know the number of people that are there by downloads, but you don't know them yet. One of the most critical things that a self-employed and a business as small as ours needs to do is we need a massive number of lurkers, because one of the biggest problems is that people are trying to convert customers from too small of a number to begin with. So begin on the outside. And this may seem contradictory to ideal clients, but it's not, because the first step with lurkers is to cast a broad net, gain the eyes and ears of as many people as possible, so that you can then start narrowing down, because only a small number of them are going to become curious about you. And an even smaller number of them are going to engage with you. And an even smaller number are actually going to connect with you. And a much, much smaller number are going to become clients. But you can imagine, if you look at that ring of clients, if you don't have a big enough number to begin with, by the time it all narrows down, you don't have enough people to convert. Okay. So the hug marketing system is both, energetically clean. It's a way of marketing that I find service-based entrepreneurs love. They feel good about it. They suddenly enjoy marketing. It doesn't feel creepy to them anymore. And very important, it works. It's a step-by-step process to bring lurkers, to build lurkers, get them engaged, get them connected, convert to clients, and then turn them into hug clients.
Oh, I love that, Jeffrey. It's like such a nice way to think about, I've always used the term ideal reader when we talk about readers for books, but I hadn't really thought about the language that target, which is, you're right, normally what we use when we're referring to people, like, that's crazy. So I love that approach. And it's almost like I can envision arms going around and like squeezing people in, right? So
it changes the energy by which you come across. And the way you come across is more aligned with the way people want to be seen. So it works. And also, I am very particular. Like, I try not to refer to anybody in my world as my audience, whether it's my speaking audience or my podcast audience. I try to call them my people, right? Because I want my people in my world. And I tell my speaking rep this all the time. It's like, are those my people? Well, at that event, if I speak at that event, are they my people? Right. I've even shifted that because audience feels a little generic to me. When I refer to my podcast listeners as my people, I have a sense of responsibility. I suddenly feel very fatherly. Like I feel a sense of responsibility of taking care of them. And I like that. I like where I function from when I take responsibility for my people.
Oh, that is wonderful. So how does this tie into the emotional journey? Are they... Yeah.
So the emotional journey, again, it's a reframe. It's basically intended anyway when I created it as a website map, like how to create an effective homepage on your website. And it focuses almost entirely on the homepage, with the interior pages being accents. And I take that approach because in today's mobile world, people aren't going to the interior pages like you think they are. And many people have their juiciest stuff on the interior pages. The homepage, you need to do all your selling on the homepage. I think a lot of websites will become either one pagers or they'll become a series of one pagers. So for example, on my website, if someone inquires about speaking, I don't send them to jeffreyshaw.com. I send them to jeffreyshaw.com/speaking, right? Yeah. So we send people to the specific pages that they need to see. So we really focus. So the emotional journey is a combination of, years of observation and what gets people engaged with your website, and also buyer psychology. And it really puts to full use my whole concept of lingo. When people get to a website, they need to feel like that has your business, your service has been built for them. The second they land on that website, they need to feel like, oh my gosh, this is built for me. That, what I call a standout statement, right? I call it a standout statement, not a tagline, also for an energetic reason. But when they see that standout statement, I want them to immediately know what you stand for and that you stand up for them. And it's compelling that it stands out. That's why I call it a standout statement. So they immediately feel like, oh, this is for me, right? Then the second they scroll even the tiniest amount, we have what I would call the empowerment section. The empowerment section is prompting with questions and statements that are so intimate to your ideal client. They're like, whoa, it's like you're in my head. Like you're probing with questions or awarenesses of what's going on in their life at this moment. Or, it's a combination of questions and statements, but they feel like, oh my gosh, this person really gets me. And that to me is the ultimate goal in marketing, is to make people feel like, wow, it's like you're in my head. And I call it the empowerment section because it has been proven time and time again, there's research on this, that people make a 70% decision to hire you or buy from you before they've contacted you.
Yes, I think that's so true.
Yep.
Yes.
I mean, I always tell people, look at your own behavior. Like we
Yeah.
forget to look at our own lives and think about in our own lives how often we've decided we're pretty much decided we're going to hire that person or buy that thing before we've even contacted them, right?
It's a formality, I think. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. I always tell my clients, like, you just have to not screw it up when they contact you because they're already ready to buy.
Yeah.
But the reason, and that's because people consumers today, choice makers, they want to be empowered. If you take their power away by telling them why they should hire you, they're going to back off. The minute you tell somebody, trust me, they don't trust you, right? So the empowerment section is just making them feel so intimate that they're empowered to choose you. Everything after that, which is all important, but then it's the benefits section. Like they want to know what's the benefit of the work that you do, not you, but what's the benefit of the work you do. And then you can start talking about yourself a little bit, like what's the benefit of working with you or buying from you specifically. With that in mind, they're 3/4 of the way through the website before you ever spoke about yourself. Okay. I love Simon Sinek. I respect him, but in marketing, start with your why doesn't work, because if you start with why, you're starting with talking about yourself. It's about the visitor. And then we end with your why, what I call the authority section. Let people know why the work you do is important to you. Let them know the story behind it, and let them see the connections to the point where they'll say, wow, it's no wonder that's what she does. Like it's this, now that I know her life story, it's no wonder this is what she chooses to do. But that's at the end because it seals the deal. Right. So this emotional journey, and there's more to it than that. This is a template I use pretty much every day because I help people rebrand the messaging on their website. This is one of my hireable services. People reach out to me. They recognize, and I can tell you statistically, 98% of websites are not effective. 98% of websites are not saying what you need to say to speak to your ideal clients, or 98% of websites are not saying what you think it's saying. So I have a process where I have people fill out an application, and it's a complimentary process. I'm happy to offer it to your listeners. They fill out an application that asks probing questions. And then I go to their website, and I personally do this because based on what they said on the application and their website is how I can see the disconnect. I'm like, oh, you think you're saying this, but that's not what's coming across. Because what I find is that people actually know themselves and they know who they serve better than what's coming across on their website. I even said to one client, because she ended up hiring me to help her with her website, I looked at her application, I looked at her website, and when I emailed her back, and I said to her, do people tell you you're polite a lot? And she goes, oh my gosh, my whole life I've been told to be a good girl and I'm polite. I'm like, yeah, your website's really polite, but it doesn't have the energy that your application did. Like you're much bolder than what you're coming across. We need to change that. Right. It was, I mean, like I said, her application spoke from her heart and her conviction and everything. And then her website is just so polite. It was like a watered down version of herself, which was not compelling. And again, I've reviewed thousands of websites. I can statistically tell you 98% of websites are not as effective as they can be if the brand messaging was better.
They're often neglected too, which I think is, it's like the last thing that we're so busy trying to win clients, we forget how important it is.
Yeah.
I love that example that you gave. I think it's such an important piece. And for me, one of my own journeys in my marketing has been being comfortable having an opinion and like having a personality. For so many years, I was just like very bland with my voice. I was kind of, like you said, polite and didn't want to ruffle, and I'm not still not like coming out and like being offensive or anything, but just having an opinion. So I love that example. Jeffrey, this has been such a good conversation. I've really, really enjoyed this. It's also been so valuable. I know that listeners and viewers will be able to take a lot from this and apply it. You mentioned the application. I'd love to know where our listeners could learn more about that, more about you, and more about your business institute and all of the other things that you offer.
Sure. By all means, start with the complimentary website review because I'm happy to do it. And to me, it's the beginning of a relationship that we can build that, hey, might lead to a hug someday. It's brandmessagereview.com. So brandmessagereview.com. Start there, fill out an application. It's super quick. But it gives me just the information I need. Like the questions that I ask are things like, what do you think are the top 3 values of your clients? I mean, a lot of people have never taken the time to actually, and I'll tell you what, I mean, the answers I get back are I can tell it right. It's like, yeah, they've actually said what their values are, but not the values of their clients. Like, no, what are the values of your clients? Like, what do you think are most important to them? So it's probing questions like that. So I take a look at it and I'll look at the website. I always email back a few tips. And again, that's brandmessagereview.com. The Business Institute is selfemployedbusinessinstitute.com. And quite honestly, all of this, if you choose to go that route, you can just go to jeffreyshaw.com and find all of it. But honestly, I would just start with brandmessagereview.com and take it from there, because once we're in communication, you'll find out about all the other stuff.
Very cool. I love that you offer that for people and
I love
as a
doing
way
it.
for them to get some value.
Well, what's fun for me is, I mean, there are people doing some crazy things out there. Like there are really unique businesses. I mean, I just got an application in yesterday that this business specializes in like Brazilian waxing or something. And I don't even know enough about that. I'm fascinated. I mean, I know what it is, but it's like, what is it about? And I'm really curious, how are they communicating? I haven't done the review yet. But to me, it's fascinating to discover what people are creating out there, and it's impressive.
Yeah, that is fun. I'm sure it's always a surprise what you're going to look at. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me today. I had such a great time talking with you.
Likewise, I did with you as well.
And for those of you who are viewing us on YouTube or listening, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I want to thank Rita Dominguez for producing this podcast. Rita, you make the podcast possible. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much to Catherine Fishman for her project management support, and Kim Foster for making sure that everything comes out clean into the world. I appreciate all of you very much. And I will be back with you before you know it.